Helen Peacock is talking with us today because she has an idea that Rotarians could not only be leaders in building positive peace around the world, but could also be leaders in ending the use of war as a way to resolve conflict. Helen has been passionate about peace, both inner peace and world peace, since her early 20s. She is the founder of Pivot to Peace, a local peace group in Collingwood, Ontario, which is part of the newly formed Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network. She is a chapter coordinator for World Beyond War, a global movement to end all wars, which has members in 190 countries around the world. And she is a Rotarian who briefly served as District Peace Chair for Rotary District 7010. She will tell you about that. And is currently the Peace Chair for the Rotary Club of Collingwood SGB. Helen's mission is to engage as many regular people as possible, Rotarians and non-Rotarians alike, in the movement to shift our planet toward what she calls peace consciousness. She has traveled to 114 countries and has a personal connection to each. For her, there is truly no other. We are all citizens of the world we share. Welcome, Helen.
Thank you, Kathy. That was lovely. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and thank you for this opportunity to speak with you. I'm just going to take a moment to screen share. Yes, and thank you to all the many guests we have today, too. It's wonderful. So I am sincerely asking this question: world peace, and by world peace, I mean the absence of war as a way of resolving conflict. Is it just a pipe dream, honestly, or do we think that it's a real possibility? And I'm wearing all three of my peace hats for this presentation. My other big question, which I consider to be a mystery question, is how come we still have war anyway? I mean, when survey after survey says that people all around the world want peace, how come we still have war? And so before getting into this, kind of delving into this a bit further, I want to tell you, share a brief experience that my husband and I had. I guess it would be March 1st of last year, 2020. And we were in Panama City, and we were reading about the Panama invasion, which I remembered very well when the US invaded Panama, because I'd watched it on TV. And we were learning that the invasion had been concentrated in an area called El Chorrillo, which is outside Panama City. And as you can see, it looks quite a bit different. And we wanted to go to El Chorrillo, but our friendly concierge advised us categorically not to go, said he could not guarantee our safety. He would not help us go there. We shouldn't go. So we talked to a friend that we had met on the street, and reluctantly, he said that he would take us. If we promised that we would slump down in the car, and under no circumstances would we get out of the car. And he said he wasn't just concerned for our safety because we look American, he was also concerned for his safety because he would be with us. So Dave and I were kind of taking this with a grain of salt, but we slumped down in the car and off we went to El Chorrillo. And literally within minutes, we came upon this very fresh, very angry mural on the wall. And you can see the helicopter over here, and you can see soldiers over there. And for those of you who don't speak Spanish, ni olvido ni perdón means never forget, never forgive. And we're thinking, what are we missing here? It was 30 years ago, the Panama invasion. And what we were missing was an appreciation that 4,000 civilians had been killed in that invasion, most of them from El Chorrillo. And what we weren't appreciating was the incredible trauma that had been inflicted on that community. Just a few days before Christmas, they're in bed at night, and all of a sudden, 20,000 US troops descend. And people were killed in their beds. People were found fused to cars because a new kind of laser weapon was being used. People were found with bullet holes in the back of their head. People were evacuated from their homes, and their homes were burned to the ground. And all Dave and I could think was, How come we didn't know this? I watched the coverage on TV. How come we didn't know this? So I'm going to come back to that question in a second. But first, I want to walk you through some of the other questions I've had, especially in my first year at Rotary. When I came into Rotary, I was already a peace activist, and I had been inspired by the Rotary International Conference in Toronto in 2018. And so I came into Rotary and I was looking for all these kind of synergies between what I was doing and what I could do with Rotary. And I was absolutely, we all are, the focus on positive peace is amazing, and the focus on education is amazing. But I had a question. If war is the greatest threat to peace, what was Rotary doing to end war? Now, another thing that piece of information that came from the Institute of Economics and Peace was the economic impact of violence. And I knew that we were spending $2 trillion a year on war and the preparations for war. I did not appreciate that the impact of that was three times that, almost 3 times that. So in other words, the money that's going into war and the preparations for war is going into development in reverse. It's literally the opposite of what we're doing with our positive peace projects all around the world. And so my question was, what is Rotary doing to help shift these military dollars away from war and toward a positive peace building initiatives? And finally is the distinction between clocks and clouds. And clock problems we can analyze, we can figure them out, we can fix them. Cloud problems are dynamic, they're big system projects. We have to look at them holistically. And I think we can all agree that we need clock and cloud solutions to end war and build positive peace. And my question was, given that Rotary had this voice at the UN and this place on the world stage, how is Rotary advocating for cloud solutions to shift our planet to a peace culture? And so I wanted to work on ending war as well as building peace. I wanted to shift, to do what we could to raise awareness, to get this money shifted away from war and to address real human security needs. And I really wanted to look at it at the big picture, because I knew that there was a huge military industrial war machine out there that was basically undoing all our good deeds. And I honestly, at the time, about a year ago, I didn't see how Rotary could help me with this, and I resigned. But I was only gone for a couple of weeks when I was invited back to come back as the district peace chair for our district, and I was given this mandate to actually look at the big picture and to talk not just about peace building, but also talk about what it would take to end war. But that mandate only lasted a couple of weeks. And then I was given a new mandate to only talk about the Rotary Peace Centers and Peace Scholars. So I felt frustrated again. I love the Peace Centers. I love the Peace Scholars. I'm working with many of them in the work I do with World Beyond War, but I also wanted to look at the big picture. But this time, we were in the middle of the pandemic. We were under a stay-at-home order, and I thought, I'm just going to stay put and look at everything I can find out about Rotary internationally. So up until now, it's been more from the sort of Canadian Rotarian point of view. I would look at what was going on all around the world. And I did. I talked to different peace chairs, and I found out there's a huge variation in what peace chairs do from one district to another. I went to at least a dozen peace conferences all around the world, many of them sponsored by Rotary, podcasts, speakers, events. I took every course that was offered by Rotary Action Group for Peace and the Institute of Economics and Peace. I took in-depth courses that were being offered by World Beyond War. I was busy. And on top of that, I was on the mailing list now. I was getting 30 emails per week from a group of Rotarians working within Rotary to prevent nuclear war. And I didn't have nuclear war on my radar screen at all. I mean, it just wasn't there. And these emails were a little overwhelming. I put them in a box in my email and I looked at them over the weekend. But as I was picking up, as I was sort of on this voyage of discovery, I felt a real shift inside me. And I became convinced that Rotary could be instrumental in shifting our planet to peace. And I'd like to just share with you a couple of the experiences that were so convincing for me. I was a fly on the wall at a peace conference that was put on by a Rotary club in Pakistan and a Rotary club in India. I didn't know anybody there. I felt privileged to be there because here they were, two nuclear countries with a disputed border between them, and presidents who were perfectly willing to use religion to divide and who each had their finger on the nuclear button. And they were talking about what they could do to diffuse tension along the border because there was a very real danger of a nuclear disaster. And I was really privileged to be with them. I went to a podcast that was about Russia. Now, just to put Russia in context, Russia has a GDP less than Canada's. So this sort of concern about Russia doing this and Russia doing that has to be taken with a bit of a grain of salt. And in this podcast, as people were talking about what to do about the Russian problem, it wasn't a Rotary podcast, a question came from a Rotarian. And she asked, has anyone ever thought about talking to the Russian people? And I thought, yeah, what a novel idea. Let's talk to the Russian people. And I went and I looked it up. Rotary has 77 clubs in Russia. Russia is the reason, supposedly, why we have NATO. And yet Rotary has 77 clubs in Russia. I thought that was fantastic. Plus, there are the inter-country committees, the ICCs, between clubs in Russia and clubs in the US. And there's an ICC between Russia and Canada. And all of that kind of dialogue and conversation I just thought was wonderful. And finally, there was the Rotary Peace Incubator Project. 50 proposals, about 40 of them would have been under different areas of focus, and about 10 were under the peace area of focus. But one of the projects that was proposed at this conference just met all of my needs. It was a collaboration between World Beyond War and Rotary Action Group for Peace. And what they were proposing was 10 young people from 10 different countries would come together for an online peace building course, and then would, in their respective countries, spend 2 months implementing a peace project, all the while rubbing shoulders with each other and learning from each other. And the countries included Cameroon and Uganda and Colombia. And I just thought, oh, that would be so fantastic for our Canadian young people. So we actually had the first team proposed and funded and everything to go in onto this project, which will start in September. So that brings me now to my 30 emails. And at the beginning, it was just overwhelmed. But gradually, as I was working my way through them, I was starting to understand a few things, starting with the basic fact that there was a culture of denial out there around the nuclear weapon issue. And of course, I wasn't aware of that because I was part of the culture of denial. And if I could just take a moment to tell you a brief story. While I'm reading through these emails in this period of research, I have agreed that my husband can throw out 3 bins of my books. And at the last minute, I run out and I rescue this book on the top of the bin because it was very meaningful to me in the 80s. And it was a book about how consciousness shifts. And very briefly, it was the story of a group of scientists who studied the Japanese monkey in the wild over 30 years. And at one point, these scientists started dropping sweet potatoes on the sand. And the monkeys loved the sweet potatoes, but they did not like the grit from the sand. And then one day, an 18-month-old female monkey washed her sweet potato in a nearby stream, and she loved it. And so she showed her mother what she'd done, and she loved it. And gradually, a few of her friends picked up the habit, and they showed their mothers. And over time, there were a number of monkeys in the tribe who were washing their sweet potato in the stream. And then one day, one monkey who had never done it before went to the stream, washed his sweet potato in the stream, loved it, and almost overnight, the entire tribe was now washing their sweet potatoes in the stream. And that's what I mean by a tipping point. It doesn't take everybody to have a change in knowledge or awareness. We just need to get to that tipping point. Erica Chenoweth, who's a professor at Harvard University, says it's about 3.4% of the population. So the reason why rescuing this book proved to be mind-boggling for me was this. This was a book about preventing nuclear war, and I had no memory that this was about preventing nuclear war. My entire memory about this book was around how consciousness shifts. And so back to the culture of denial, I was truly part of the culture of denial. Another thing I'd never thought about before was the fact that thousands of military personnel are training continually so they can launch a bomb in minutes to destroy our planet. So think about the consciousness behind that and the fear-based energy that's going on behind that. I mean, this is really obvious, and yet I hadn't sort of looked at it in terms of how basically and fundamentally undemocratic it is that just a few people in a few countries could make a decision that maybe even the people in their own countries didn't agree with and could impact billions of people around the world. One of the links in these emails led me to a presentation by a man who laid out a timeline from World War II to today and showed us the 50 times that there was an error or a potential catastrophe with a nuclear weapon. And of course, we don't know about that. The nuclear industry doesn't want us to know about that. We may have heard of one or two of them, but there were 50 that he told us about. And the first strike doctrine, I just find this horrifying that the United States reserves the right to drop a bomb on you if they think you're going to drop a bomb on them. And we all know how faulty their intelligence can be. So just think of the state of sort of readiness and alertness and anxiety and fear that inculcates in the rest of the world. They have to kind of be on their guard all the time. And this one was a bit of an eye-opener because, of course, we haven't used nuclear weapons since the Second World War, right? We haven't actually used them. So maybe deterrence is working, maybe, except if I take a gun and I hold you up and I steal your wallet, I don't shoot you, but I steal your wallet. Have I used the gun? Yes, I have. And so another presentation told us about 30 times that the US alone, I don't know about other nuclear countries, threatened to use the nuclear, to drop a nuclear bomb if the other country didn't go along with the US agenda. So have they been used? Yes, they have. And then I don't need to belabor this point, the staggering waste of money that's going into this and the effort to modernize. Now we want to modernize our nuclear arsenal. I don't need to go into that. So 13,500 nuclear warheads in 9 countries. Each of these countries, not one of them, has a plan for recovery were they to actually use a bomb. And in fact, physicians say that there is no recovery possible anyway. And I think it's really important to recognize that those of us outside the industrial, military, political complex, you and me, we can see clearly, we can look at this and we can see clearly that as long as there are nuclear weapons, peace is not possible. I mean, if you think about it, the definition of negative peace is the absence of violence or the threat of violence. The very presence of nuclear weapons is a threat. So back to my big question. How did we get to this place? Why is there still war when people say they want peace? How did we get to the place nuclear-wise where we are today? Why are we spending $2 trillion a year on war and preparations for war? And Einstein says, no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. And the level of consciousness that we have today in our culture is based on old beliefs and myths and fear. And so what are these old beliefs? Like, what do we keep hearing from people? When we ask them, why is there still war? We hear, war is inevitable. It's part of human nature. It's always been there, don't we? Maybe we even think that. We hear that war is necessary. Sometimes you have to draw a line in the sand for democracy and freedom. We hear that war can be justified. There's such a thing as the just war, always as a last resort, of course. We try everything else first, but then war can be justified. And we hear that the industrial military complex is just too powerful politically and economically, just too powerful. And we wouldn't be able to make inroads there at all. So we're Rotarians, and we ask, is this the truth? Is it true that war is inevitable? And the fact of the matter is that conflict may be inevitable, but war is a choice. I mean, China went 500 years without a war. The countries in Western Europe who used to be fighting continually have gone the last 75 years without a war. We live on a border with the United States, and we've gone 200 years without a war. So no, war is not inevitable. War is a choice. What about war being necessary? In fact, a lot of research today that more and more is saying that nonviolent defense is far more likely to succeed and far more likely to last than violent defense, and without the death and destruction that comes with war. I mean, we've seen Gandhi, we've Nelson Mandela, we have a sense of what can be done nonviolently, Martin Luther King. What about this idea about war being justified? Well, remember, to be justified, it has to be a last resort. And in fact, because the human mind is infinitely creative and nonviolent alternatives are proving unlimited, war can never be a last resort. That's just a fact. And the next time someone says it was a last resort, ask them to show you the 990 other resorts that were tried first. Which brings me to the last one. When enough people are educated on the suffering of victims and the environmental destruction of war, most people don't realize that a number one polluter, creator of our climate crisis today is war. Most people don't realize that. The environmental destruction of war, the political support will disappear. And when the political support disappears, the power of the industrial military complex will decrease. This is just a graph that my husband put together for me, showing the Dow Jones went up by about 150% from 9/11 to 2019, while Lockheed Martin went up by 1,742%. Now, Lockheed Martin's clients are mainly governments, and they're using our tax dollars to buy weapons. And I don't think that we want to be funding war profiteering. So let's come back. Why is there still war? John Horgan did an exhaustive analysis and in fact found out that there was only one answer. He applied the scientific method to every possible factor that could correlate to war. And the one answer was that wars are made by cultures that celebrate or tolerate war. And we live in a culture that tolerates war, not in Canada, of course, but over there. We live in a culture that tolerates war. And he makes the point that you can tolerate something even while telling a pollster that you oppose it. Real opposition means you have to speak up. Real opposition takes work. So we can look at it like this. We have a culture that tolerates war. There have been 250 wars since the Second World War, and these wars are just the tip of the iceberg. The culture of war is so much broader and deeper. It's in our heads and our books and our toys and our games and our news and our education systems and our monuments, and it's everywhere. Last year for Remembrance Day, the Globe and Mail had 7 pages in the Globe about Remembrance Day, but nowhere did they mention the word peace. And remember, Remembrance Day was originally called Armistice Day and was meant to be celebrating the signing of a peace treaty. So I really think the word peace should be showing up as an example in our Remembrance Days. So if we come back to the hundreds monkey again, I didn't tell you the whole story. Yes, the added energy of the hundreds monkey was a tipping point for the tribe, but something unexpected and really quite miraculous happened. The habit of washing sweet potatoes jumped over the sea, and monkeys on the mainland Japan started to wash their sweet potatoes in the stream, and monkeys on neighboring islands started to wash their sweet potatoes in the stream. It was if there was a point in which if only one more person tunes into a new awareness, consciousness shifts so that that awareness can be picked up by almost everyone. And if we think about this, we know intuitively that this is true. The Berlin Wall came down on a weekend. It was up for years. It came down on a weekend. Or look to the women's movement. The world today is a completely different place for my daughter than it was for my mother. And that just happened in my lifetime because enough people became aware that women could play a much more significant role in society, and eventually our culture adjusted. So that is how consciousness shifts. And I believe that Rotarians can bring that awareness to shifting our world to peace because we're everywhere and because peace is in our DNA. And we were there for the founding of the United Nations. So I believe Rotarians can do this. How do we raise peace consciousness? Well, we have to become literate in the stories of those who bear the brunt of our wars. Dave and I did not know about the pain and suffering of the people in El Chorrillo in Panama during the Panama invasion. We have to become literate in those stories, and we have to develop a more discerning mind so that we're not just going along with what we're hearing in the media and on the news or and so on. And if I come back to the Panama invasion, this was the newspaper coverage at the time. Well, of course we had to get Noriega, right? He was a drug dealer, right? He was ruining the lives of 1 million American kids. And you can't see this headline over here, but it says, the president says he had no choice. So this was the newspaper coverage. The television coverage, however, an exhaustive analysis was done of every single piece of television coverage during the Panama invasion, from a few days before to from a few weeks before to a few weeks after. And the conclusion was made that television actually sold the invasion. The anchors talked about how our troops were doing today, and it was a good day for us, and we're making inroads, as if they were members of the invasion force, and no mention, not a single mention of the dead civilians, and no questioning of the reason for the invasion. I mean, really, drug trafficking? It was because Noriega, as we now know, wasn't playing ball in Nicaragua, and there was concern about the Panama Canal going back to Panama. And my favorite example of this was one night on the NBC News. In one moment, the military occupiers are doing peacekeeping chores, and in the next moment, the Latin American diplomats who condemned the invasion were a lynch mob. Now, I don't think that our television anchors were consciously trying to sell us on the war. I think it was unconscious. I think they were relaying what they thought was the news and what they had been given, and we were taking it in. And I didn't have enough of a discerning mind at that time to question what I was hearing on TV, and hence ended up very ignorant about what had really happened. So coming back to what it takes to raise peace consciousness, we need to be in a place where the very idea of a just war, a war that can be justified, is just as offensive to us as a charitable rape or humanitarian slavery or benevolent child abuse. And I know that we can get that place because that's the way I feel now. I suspect there are many of you here tonight who also feel that way. So how can Rotary make the biggest impact raising peace consciousness? And I come back to my 3 questions. What could Rotary do to help prevent war? What could Rotary do to help get some of those dollars transferred over to positive peace building? And what big picture cloud solutions could Rotary be advocating using its voice at the UN and elsewhere? And I say that we need to consult the scientists. We consulted them for the pandemic and we've been following their lead. Let's consult the scientists on this question. I watched the entire unveiling of the doomsday clock this year. You know, it's been left at 100 seconds to midnight, the closest it's ever been. And there were 3 major reasons. One was a positive, even more devastating pandemic, possible pandemic. The other was the worsening climate crisis. We've been told we only have 10 years to turn that around. But the number one was their concern about the accelerating nuclear weapons programs and all the rhetoric around what's happening around the nuclear weapons programs. So if we're going to listen to the scientists, for starters, we need to get familiar with the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the TPNW. And at the beginning, I had to practice those initials, the TPNW, which entered into force in January of this year. Now, up until now, there were comprehensive treaties against chemical weapons and biological weapons, but not for nuclear. So this is the one for nuclear. It prohibits development, testing, production, et cetera, of nuclear weapons, with the ultimate goal being their total elimination. And this is so important. It helps stigmatize nuclear weapons in the same way that chemical and biological weapons have been stigmatized, and will serve as a catalyst for their eventual elimination. Now, 86 states have signed the treaty, 54 states have ratified it, and 69 nations did not vote. Among them, all the nuclear weapon states and all the NATO members, including Canada, which supposedly has an anti-nuclear position. So that's the state of the treaty right now. That's where we stand. So coming back to my questions about how could Rotary make the biggest impact, Rotary could advocate for worldwide support of the treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons. Now, I think that I can read your minds, and I'm just imagining that what you're thinking right now is, but. Helen obviously hasn't been in Rotary very long. I mean, you'd think she would have figured this out by now, because most people figure it out in 2 years, but she's really must have a missing link somewhere to be proposing something like this, because Rotary can't be involved politically, right? Were you thinking that? Rotary can't be involved politically. What is she thinking? Well, my answer to that is, I don't think so. And I'll tell you why. I read the entire February article in Rotary magazine on Rotary's success in eradicating polio in Africa. I read it cover to cover 3 times. Now, the 4 major challenges that Rotary faced were conflict, rumors, hard to reach children, and political will. So how did Rotary overcome these challenges? Well, Rotary and its partners negotiated truces and military protection. They negotiated truces. That sounds pretty political to me. How did they handle the issue of rumors? Well, rumors led to the vaccinations becoming a political thing, so Rotary advocated with government leaders and educated the public to dispel these news. Advocated with government leaders, advocated. That sounds pretty political to me. What about the hard to reach children? Well, borders are porous, so Rotary arranged cross-border campaigns coordinated with surrounding nations. What a concept, coordinating with surrounding nations. That sounds pretty political to me. And finally, my personal favorite, political will. Rotary members used their respected roles in society and often their personal charisma to advocate for their governments to become active in polio eradication. This is word for word from the article. And if advocating and using your respected role in society and your own personal cachet to advocate with your government isn't political, then I honestly don't know what political is. That is the very definition of political. So I come back to this, but, and I think we need to clarify our language here. It's not that Rotary can't get involved politically. It's that Rotary can't be partisan. Of course, we can't be advocating for this party over that party or this government over that government. But I think it's very clear, it's an indisputable fact that Rotarians can be brilliantly and effectively political when it comes to saving lives. Brilliantly and effectively political. So we could just as easily take out eradicating polio in Africa and substitute worldwide advocating for worldwide support for the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And the challenges we would face would be the same, and the strategies that we would use to overcome those challenges would be the same. We know how to do this. We've already done it. We know how to do this. So what would be a first step? Well, the first step is really easy. We can just apply the four-way test, and we know we're outside looking at the industrial, military, political complex, and we know that worldwide endorsement of this treaty would make us safer. We know that. Now, what many of us may not be aware of is what we were talking about before the meeting started, that there is a council on resolutions that meets every year and looks at resolutions that have been proposed from the various districts in Rotary. And last year, our district, my district, District 7010, put forward a request that the Rotary International Board consider supporting the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. And what do you think the result was? Rejected by more than 2-1. So of the 500 districts in Rotary, more than 2-1 rejected this resolution last year. Now, I don't think that they were rejecting the treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons. I don't think they were consciously rejecting that any more than I think that the television anchors were consciously trying to sell us on the Panama invasion. I think that most representatives were saying, oh, that looks political. No, we can't do that, without thinking more deeply about what we could, in fact, do. So the answer, education, education, education. And this year, we're putting the resolution forward again from my district, requesting the Rotary International Board to consider endorsing the treaty. And this time, something even more, and we're putting in the arguments that relate to Rotary's established political expertise. Now, when we were doing a presentation about this to the Rotary Club of Collingwood, we had our neighboring district was there. There were a couple of presidents from clubs in District 6330, and they got all enthusiastic about this and were very excited. I'm going to be doing a presentation for them early next week, and they're going to put this through to their district. And we thought, this is fantastic. Isn't it fantastic? Because now there'll be 2 districts that are suggesting Rotary International do this. So it'll have twice the impact of just our district putting it forward again. But then something really wonderful happened, because people were reaching out to people that they knew elsewhere in Rotary and talking to them about it. And 9 more clubs in 9 more districts are going through the process of proposing the resolution and asking their district to endorse it and send it in for the vote. And we have clubs we have a club in Pakistan, a club in India, we have clubs in the US, clubs in Canada. So I think I don't know how far the process will go within each district, whether the districts will approve it or not, but the process is underway to ask for that. And then on Tuesday, I gave a presentation to a group in Australia that ended up having 5 districts represented. And I was telling Doug that after the presentation, we talked for about 40 minutes. And the clubs from each of these 5 districts are going to go back and propose the resolution to their district. And so we're going to have Australia in the loop too, hopefully. So this is going to send a powerful message to Rotary International about our desire for the end of nuclear weapons on the planet. And our hope is that the result this time will be adopted, because we're hoping that we can encourage people to look at this in a more conscious way and see the possibilities of what we could be doing. And again, it's education, education, education. Now, I don't think it will be as difficult as we may think, because I haven't met Shakar Mehta, but I have heard him speak at least 6 times, maybe more. And he is a supporter of the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. He has signed the Japanese Survivors' Appeal. He's a huge cheerleader for all of Rotary's positive peace initiatives, but he also says things like, we shouldn't be arming ourselves with weapons we won't use. Spending money on clean water is so much more important than money on the arms race. And he thought in the most recent time I heard him speak, he said very thoughtfully, maybe we could be doing more at the UN with our representative network. And another goal of his was that he wanted to grow Rotary by another 100,000 people to 1.3 people in his year. So we may have more support here than we might have thought, or certainly he's very open. And then secondly, remember I said those of us outside the industrial, military, political complex can clearly see that we must get nuclear weapons off our planet. Surprise, surprise, surprise. Recent polls in Belgium, Iceland, Italy, Spain, Netherlands, Germany, the UK, Canada, Japan, Australia, 70 to 80% of the citizens support the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. It's the political elite and the industrial military complex that does not support it. And so I say that by endorsing the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, Rotary would be speaking for the 70 to 80% of citizens around the world. And I would suggest to you that when you speak up for that number of people and are advocating for a cause that matters to that number of people, you will become a compelling organization and in the process grow membership. So that brings me back to my original question. World peace, pipe dream or possibility? And I honestly think that advocating for worldwide support for the treaty would make peace possible, and that we Rotarians could be the tipping point in doing that.